Islam wars. Five on the left, two on the right. Allah, Father of the universe.
Allah, the Father of the universe.
Father of love.
Father of love.
Truth.
Truth.
Peace.
Peace.
Freedom.
Freedom.
And justice.
And justice.
Allah is my protector.
Allah is my protector.
My guide.
My guide.
And my salvation.
And my salvation.
By night.
By night.
And by day.
And by day.
To His holy prophet.
To His holy prophet.
Noble Dualist.
Noble Dualist.
Islam.
Islam.
Prophet warns all Muslims, governors ordered to read proclamation at each meeting. I hereby inform all members that they must end all radical, agitating speeches while at work, in their homes, or on the streets. We are for peace and not destruction. Stop flashing your cards at Europeans. It causes confusion. Remember, your card is for your salvation. Failure to obey these orders will be of severe consequence. We are for love, truth, peace, freedom, and when these principles are violated, justice must then take its course. Any member or group of members who hold malicious feelings toward the temple or the prophet or violate the divine covenant of the Moorish movement will receive their reward from Allah for their unjust deeds. All true Moors will and must obey the law as laid down to them by their prophet. If they lose confidence in their prophet, they should turn their cardin button, cease wearing their turban and fez, and return to the state where I, the prophet, found you. This is a holy and divine movement founded by the prophet Noble Juali. And if the prophet is not right, the temple is not right. The prophet, therefore, is sending out a divine plea to all Moorish Americans that they do their part in protecting their prophet and the temple. This is an everlasting movement founded by the prophet through the will of Allah to redeem his people from their sinful ways. Noble Juali. Islam. To be proclaimed at every meeting. Islam. I am glad to know that I have a few faithful Moors among you all, and I desire for them to know the truth and the divine truth. There is a host of jealousy about me and the movement now by the same people of our side of the nation that claim that I was only a joke and unreal. But now, since they have found out from the government officials and the nations of the earth that this is the only sole foundation that all Asiatics must depend upon for their earthly salvation as American citizens, they are working every scheme that they can to disqualify me so they may take charge of the situation. I have notified all these things to you long ago in the past. It is through the faithful Moors that attribute to the movement and uplifting funds. The ones that paid their divine respect to me and the movement will be remembered. That is why I am calling upon all faithful Moors to increase their faithfulness to me, your prophet, and your divine Moorish movement. I need finance and I need it badly. Never before have I needed finance so badly as I do at present, so I can shove aside the discord that is facing the nation. It all comes through jealousy because of my fame and nobility. The nations of the world will not recognize the movement without I, the prophet, being head. It has been proven by my works which I have performed in the past few years. Prophet Noble Juali. To the members of the Moorish Science Temple of America. Islam. This is the instruction from your Prophet Noble Juali. Be faithful unto your forefathers' divine and national creed, that you will be blessed for your good deeds that you sow in the flesh. Allah is the one that judges the world, and his judgment is now on, but the weak can comprehend it not. The end of time is drawing near, so says Allah to his divine prophet, I Noble Juali. And that's why many hearts have been turned to stone. Many have eyes to see but cannot see, ears to hear but cannot hear, lest they will be confounded of their sins. These are trying hours now, dear Moors, and every evil spirit is moving, and they are trying every weak mind to overthrow and drag out the true foundation that has been laid, and to cause confusion in the minds of the ones that do believe. But if you have the true love of Allah and the spirit of your forefathers, you fear not what you hear or see, but would sacrifice the utmost of your very life to protect your movement and your prophet. Watch your enemies, dear Moors. Your enemies are the ones that speak against your prophet and ridicule him to the very lowest, and the ones that speak against your divine and national principles of your temples. Act accordingly, and Allah would bless you for your good work. Peace. Your divine prophet, Noble Juali. Islam. So, there was we had a phone call with one of these governmental bodies or whatever, and then when we're outlining to them about international law and whatever like that, they came back and said that they're under Canada, said that they're under Canada Human Rights Code as far as their international human rights law or whatever. So in the discussion with them was like almost that they're sort of in line with the international stuff from a perspective, but that's not what they're going to be using when it's time to govern against the indigenous people or whatever. They're going to deal with the human rights code for Canada. So we realize that Ontario has their human rights code. Canada has their human rights code, which is how they block off respecting and honoring the rights of the indigenous and the human rights or whatever, while showing the face to the world like, yeah, we're down with the international thing, endorsing UN DRIP and certain things like that. So part of the information that I was looking up was and Brother Omar had triggered it in my head that he was doing some research and found out about all these different violations of human rights, international law, or whatever, that people have been calling Canada out on, but nobody has really done anything with it, right? So in doing the research on it, there's two concepts. I guess you gotta look these up, see if these are in there. There's two concepts that or two theoretical ideas that governments could employ. They can either do monism or they could do dualism, right? Now, I just wanted to read a few articles with regard to the human rights in Canada to get their perspective, how they're looking at this thing, and for us to realize and recognize that this is not going to be some show your card, show your papers, and they're going to do whatever, right? These people have put certain things in place so that they don't have to go by international law per se. They don't have to go by international law because they're gonna call their codes that law, and then also being held to certain standards of the international community. They sort of get away from having to deal with certain things like the thing that's going on with the sister right now that they killed in the hospital, right? She recorded them. Whole hospital should be shut down for violating on those type of levels, not just an individual getting fired or whatever, you know what I mean? Or reprimand or whatever like that. This lady has them on recording, like, whatever, we don't even care about you or whatever, right? So there's both of them aren't in there? Okay, so that's crazy. All right, so we'll go to we'll use the online version. So obviously these are modern terms used in order to be able to get away with certain things. Lex posterior. see if that one's in there. Lex posterior. The terms monism and dualism are used to describe two different theories of the relationship between international law and national law. Many states, perhaps most, are partly monist and partly dualist in their actual application of international law in their national system. Monists accept that the internal and international legal systems form a unity. Both national legal rules and international rules that a state has accepted, for example, by way of a treaty, determine whether actions are legal or illegal. In most called monist states, a distinction between international law in the form of treaties and other international law, example, customary international law or jus cogens, is made. Such states may thus be partly monist and partly dualist. In a pure monist state, international law does not need to be translated into national law. It is simply incorporated and has effect automatically in national or domestic laws. The act of ratifying an international treaty immediately incorporates the law into national law, and customary international law is treated as part of national law as well. International law can be directly applied by a national judge and can be directly invoked by citizens, just as if it were national law. A judge can declare a national rule invalid if it contradicts international rules, because in some states, international rules have priority. In other states, like Germany, treaties have the same effect as legislation. And by the principle of lex posterior, derogat priori, later law removes the earlier, only takes precedence over national legislation enacted prior to their ratification. In its most pure form, monism dictates that national law that contradicts international law is null and void, even if it postdates international law, and even if it is constitutional in nature. From a human rights point of view, for example, this has some advantages. For example, a country has accepted a human rights treaty such as International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but some of its national laws limit the freedom of the press. A citizen of that country who is being persecuted by his state for violating his national law can invoke the human rights treaty in a national courtroom and can ask the judge to apply this treaty and decide that the national law is invalid. They do not have to wait for national law that translates international law. So when someone in the Netherlands feels his human rights are being violated, he can go to a Dutch judge, and the judge must apply the law of the convention. He must apply international law, even if it is not in conformity with Dutch law. You have anything there?
Lex posterior derogat priori. A later statute takes away the effect of the prior one, but the later statute must either expressly repeal or be manifestly repugnant to the earlier one. Brown Max 29, Maxfield, blah, blah, subsection 7.
So, just like Article 6 of the Constitution, they say treaty is the supreme law of the land, and any jurisdiction under that doesn't have the power of quote unquote law. State, municipal, or whatever can't even talk law if they're not dealing with constitution, treaties, etc. Right? How is it that they can get around this? We look at again in Canada's documentation, they're saying that Canada is a common law jurisdiction. So if it's a common law jurisdiction, then all this stuff is not even supposed to apply. But what did they do? They took the common law, related that to some marriage or whatever. When you live with a woman for more than a certain amount of time, now you're common law. And then they call that quote unquote common law, bury the actual common law, and then now they have these things that they could throw in where it's discretion now. Yeah. Right? It's not
So they're using the du jour to tie it to the corporate.
to the corporate, but then standing on the corporate when it's time to exercise or whatever. Go ahead.
Huh? Okay.
Bruce in here? So it's super.
Yeah. Right, and that's the monism, which is supposed to be the form of lex posterior, so that the national law doesn't, not even the national law, the individuals who are supposed to be administering the law, they can get called out if they try to do something contrary to international law. You can hold them to the international law standard and then they have to stick by it. But this is why they're making it that the monism is, or they're saying that some of them are part monism, some of them are part dual, right? Which again is going into this colorable idea of sort of like them just doing their own thing, them doing what they want to do. Peace, man. Right? Peace. Right?
Yeah. You get that? I just send you something.
No, not even. I didn't have my phone on.
Good.
Right?
Good.
The lip sync
Mm-hmm.
disappears his lover.
Combines with the DNA. Expels light. That's their words. Huh?
Lips essay rap. Okay, well, check that out. Yeah. So now the other part of it is that the foundation of monism comes out of from the religious idea of one God, or in the case of this, one law, which would ultimately be the international law, because if all the international people are going by this international standard, then everybody who's below international should be going by that same standard, right? Which again goes back to the concept with the monotheistic, with the concept of one God, which is Islam, Christianity, Judaism, which is the foundation of the system that we have that we're complaining about is violating us, which is the foundation of the system that went in and corrupted everything, so that people don't even have the religious aspect of the rights and things like that. It's big. It's ultimately, I think, the same thing with just having this in there that appreciates one, right? And relative to everything else, so we put money in there, and that really being fiat to them when they say money. What real money is, the standard is really gold and silver. It's the standard, right? The real aspect is the one God with many different aspects, not one God like that, right? And again, if they're going to take the international law, shroud it, create fiat human rights law, And then they're pushing the fiat human rights law as the real law, but then have the international things there. So when you go on their website, oh yeah, UN drip. When you talk to different organizations, oh yeah, UN Declaration of whatever. Yeah, American Declaration is that. But they're not using that as the standard of the law. They're gonna use the code that they made up. Right? And again, because and when we go to dualism, but Canada's not even this. Canada's in the dualism part, which is a whole different realm with regard to the international law or whatever. Dualism. Dualists emphasize the difference between national and international law and require the translation of the latter into the former. Without this translation, international law does not exist as law. International law has to be national law as well, or it is no law at all. If a state accepts a treaty but does not adapt its natural law in order to conform to the treaty, or does not create a national law explicitly incorporating the treaty, then it violates international law. But one cannot claim that the treaty has become part of international law. Citizens cannot rely on it and judges cannot apply it. National law that contradict it remain in force. According to dualists, national judges never apply international law, only international law that has been translated into national law. So when we look at certain more situations, they went to court, and then we're telling them about international law, and they don't go with it. And we're thinking about, them violating international law. It's not that they're violating international law, that they have a system set up where if the international law has not been legislated to be part of law, then they could disregard it based on the system. So it's really the system that they set up that's the violation, not that they're going against the international law, which again is why when we go to all these different websites of all these different governmental organizations, corporations, or whatever, all of them are going to have this thing on their site as if they're down with the international law and the rights of the people from a global perspective, when they're really not there like that. I mean, this is part of when we peace more when we explain with Moores about if we get violated by them, there has to be the concept of just sue these people. Like it can't be on the level of complain to them that they violated some aspect, or that they should be doing this or they should be doing that. We have to recognize that they're practicing dualism. This is a common law jurisdiction where the rights of the people are supposed to be considered at all times. As soon as they're not considering the rights of the people, the mindset should be lawsuit. Right? Now again, this is the whole thing with having a body and this aspect of us being a society and having everybody in the same mind frame, having everybody in the same place, so that everything that we do with regard to suit or complaint or whatever is from class action. It's always going to be coming from the body. It's never going to be one individual that's seeking the remedy. The remedy is always going to be as the whole getting the remedy, which is part of the issue with our people, that with Dualist days 80 people, but then regular meeting there's 15 people. And then we go to something else, and then there might be 25. when it should be 80 across the board for everything. Right? To build that energy, so when we do say class action, these people know exactly where we're coming from, because everything's gonna have 80 names on it, right? Even with issues of more doing tribunals, having court and all that, right? 80 people show up for somebody's sin, it's probably not gonna go how the colonists want it to go. Like, more than likely, the numbers are gonna have an effect on the outcome. Because if this individual is taking a position, and then there's all these people who's backing them in this position, the position is probably legit. You know, international law as such can confer no rights co-signable in municipal courts. It is only insofar as the rules of international law are recognized as included in the rules of municipal law that they are allowed in municipal courts to give rise to rights and obligations. The supremacy of international law is a rule in dualist systems as it is in monist systems. Sir Hirsch Lauterpacht pointed out the court's determination to discourage the invasion of international obligations and its repeated affirmation of the self-evident principle of international law that a state cannot invoke its municipal law as the reason for a non-fulfillment of its international obligations. The self-evident principle of international law that a state cannot invoke its municipal laws as the reason for non-fulfillment of international obligations. So as soon as we stand on, we have a right to a nationality, which is international law, they're gonna start talking about Canadian Bill of Rights, or Human Rights Code, or something that is not, in language, it's in harmony with it. In application, it doesn't apply because that law is lower than the international law. And then they're always gonna go with the international law being the standard for society and whatever like that. But when it comes down to these tribunals or whatever, they're telling you about Ontario rights. They're telling you about Highway Traffic Act and you know, Child Services Act and all these different acts, which all of them are municipal law, and them presenting it is saying, well, we don't really have to go by international obligations because we have these, which is really corrupt government, and more reason for us to get our stuff in order so that we can have our own thing to govern ourselves instead of relying on what they have to be governed under. If international law is not directly applicable, as in the case in dualist systems, then it must be translated into national law. An existing national law that contradicts international law must be translated away. It must be modified or eliminated in order to conform to international law. So international law being the standard, everything else that they present that's not international law has to be translated away. It doesn't even have the power of law like that. Just like you're saying, it's de facto. So being that it's de facto, automatically international law is supposed to be what the standard is. But again, if they've taken common law and made that about some marriage because you live with somebody for 10 years or whatever, that means you're common law. When common law is really the law that governs society, not something that they made up. They just did the same thing again of creating something, calling it law, and then running with the thing that they're created as what the law is. And then when we look at the landscape of rights in Canada or whatever, we'll go through some things, you'll see how much in violation they are based on them being a dualist or having a dualism system. That again, they're not even going to mention this in their governmental pages or whatever. You're not going to hear them say dualism or monism. Because once they say those, then they're giving up that they're obviously not with the international issues. Any questions, comments?
Didn't Canada pass some bill that we can, indigenous people can establish one from the government?
Well, with so the Senate bill, whatever the bill was, they repealed it. Whatever the bill was, they said we're not signing on to that because then that means we have no power, right? Because the only way that they can do what they're doing is by the people's abandonment of their rights, which is where a majority of our people at, because they don't want nothing to do with nationality or whatever like that. They're black and proud and all that. So automatically, international stuff doesn't apply to them, even though, they're gonna have, lawyers talk for them and political people and whoever talk for them from the perspective of their rights are getting violated, but if they abandon their right, how is right going to apply to you if you're abandoned? Even one right, if you abandon, no other rights could apply to you.
That's why they don't let them speak. They could give you a free life.
Right. They'll give you a free one, just to make sure that you don't talk. Right? The problem with again, from the human rights point of view, if a human rights treaty is accepted for purely political reasons and states do not intend to fully translate it into national law or to take a monist view on international law, then the implementation of the treaty is very uncertain. Right, then that's going back to even with Treaty of Peace and Friendship and how Moors have such a hard time putting that on these people when that's even in Constitution. Right? But then if they're not going to use the organic Constitution, they're going to use Constitution with 500 amendments that they made up as what the law is, then they just blocked off the international law, they just blocked off the treaties under the guise of Constitution. Because the people never challenged them on, well, hold on a second, how come you're using the Constitution with more than 10 amendments? Why are you using the Constitution 20-something amendments as what the Constitution is? Right? The problem with lex posterior, in dualist systems, international law must be translated into national law. And existing national law that contradicts international law must be translated away. It must be modified or eliminated in order to conform to international law. However, the need for translation in dualist system causes a problem with regard to national laws voted after the act of translation. In a monist system, a national law that is voted after an international law has been accepted and that contradicts the international law must automatically null and void at the moment that it's voted. So they say, we endorse UN DRIP. And then like you say, well, the Senate says they signed on to that. Once they sign on to it and then vote it in, then international law is supposed to take over at that point. But international law doesn't take over. They stick with the thing that they're going with as as national law or quasi law or codes or acts or ordinances, or statutes or whatever as the law. When before at the vote, if they're not gonna say, okay, well we vote that, and now international law is the standard that you're gonna follow. So when they say UN DRIP, United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, we sign on to that. That's supposed to be the law now. There's not even supposed to be any other stuff. Everything's supposed to be based in that. But they know that by, again, the people's abandonment and as well as their colorable actions, they don't really have to do it like that because the people aren't even in the right mindset to even know what's going on.
Fair enough. I would say they're in a phantom form.
Yeah. Phantom form of law. The international rule. Okay. In a monist system, a national law that is voted after an international law has been accepted and that contradicts the international law becomes automatically null and void at the moment it is voted. The international rule continues to prevail. In a dualist system, however, the original international law has been translated into national law. If all went well, but this national law can be overridden by another national law on the principle of lex posterior, the latter law replaces the earlier one. This means that the country, willingly or unwillingly, violates international law. A dualist system requires continuous screening of all subsequent national law for the possible incompatibility with earlier international law. So when we look at the implementation of certain rights and the issue that is had when it comes to, even if it's not basic rights, even if it's not just the basic rights, any type of rights that exist in the international capacity, and people want those rights to be acknowledged and adhered to and whatever. As soon as they don't, we have to look at the system, not the individuals that are violating. It's the system that's there. And here it's a dualist system, which they're gonna ride with the codes, the acts, the statutes, the ordinances before they ride with the international law. More again, so why it's important for Moors to be vocal with this information. Because the only way that the things are gonna change is if people have knowledge of what's going on. Them not having knowledge of what's going on means that the stuff that we're dealing with continues. Or the things that we could remedy, it's only gonna be for us to remedy. And then they just continue to suffer, right? Because that's the position that they're choosing.
What I notice when I'm out there and I'm broke up, nobody speaks.
Yeah.
Nobody speaks because it's not enough their quasi thing. The quasi thing or the fake thing, they know that. They know to respond to that.
Yeah.
When I speak, they just listen. When they speak is to ask me something. But they can't like try to counteract me or nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's just like foreign things they hear. Never hear it. So they have to.
Yeah. This is sendcanada.ca. Sendcanada.ca. Implementing Canada's human rights obligation. Report of the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights. So this is the thing where you talk about, where they voted on the stuff, and then they had a committee that addressed the issues of human rights because they realized that there are certain people who are in Senate or whatever that they're not even looking at it from the perspective of acknowledging these rights, or they wouldn't have shut down the bill, right? Extract from the Journals of the Senate, Thursday, May 10th, 2001. Domestic human rights mechanisms. Long before human rights were constitutionally entrenched in this country, they were championed by a variety of non-governmental groups and actors. Organized labor, the women's rights movement, other human rights groups and political activists, church groups, etc., all played a role and continue to do so. The tireless lobbying of government by these groups eventually would lead to legislative change. Initially, such redress was often directed at specific groups or grievances. Ultimately, the linkages between what all of these various groups were pursuing and the overarching concept of human rights was recognized, and broader, more systematic remedies were devised. Prior to this coalescing of various claims and interests into the more generic notion of human rights that we know today, the legal protections were more haphazard. In Canada, the common law offered some protections to civil liberties and due process in the form of judicial interpretive presumptions against legislative interference. In addition, some provisions of the 1867 Constitution do not contain selective protections for at least certain minority communities. Again, going back to the thing of the abandonment, that they want to be all these tribes and all this other stuff instead of being nationals. They want to be classified as minority. They want to be Negro, black, colored, and all this. They're happy because they just got a first black, green party, whatever, forever. That's what you're happy about? Somebody that they put in a seat, right? Who's gonna just go up there and they're gonna be going through that whole stuff again of statutes, ordinances, codes, and all that stuff, and not deal with any international law, not deal with anything having to do with remedy for these people, except the individual who's in the seat that's getting their 80 million a year to do whatever it is that they're doing.
People,
Right? Yep.
Young Black off that was the whole thing for Barbados. Getting rid of the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Barbados. Right? Right? It came from the Republic.
Yep.
Falls in line just like what you're talking about, right? You know, maybe they're looking at that from that perspective too, right? It's just like that. It's not for the people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is really with the adoption of statutory bills of rights, such as Canadian Bill of Rights of 1960 and human rights codes by the provinces and by Parliament in the mid to late 20th century, culminating with the addition to the Constitution of 1982 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that effective efforts were made to entrench systematic human rights into Canadian law and government. So them saying Charter of Rights and Freedoms being part of the Constitution was them bringing human rights into Canadian law and government, when that's a fiction, because all those stuff strip the people of their rights. Those things have nothing to do with upholding the rights of the people, right? Those things only uphold the rights of members of Parliament, members of the Senate, and corpses and all that. Nothing to do with the people's rights. But again, with the acquiescence of the people by not challenging certain things and question certain things because of them having lack of knowledge, is more so why our importance is critical in this idea of rights and law and things like that. Because, you know, it becomes evident why they wanted the people to not be Moors, why they wanted them to be Negro, black, colored, and whatever else. Because once we're in the jurisdiction of Moors, then not just international law applies, but common law applies, universal law applies, natural law applies, and everything having to do with de jure and right law is what is applicable. Anything other than that is going to lead to people being violated. Canada's domestic human rights protections can be divided into two categories. One, traditional civil liberties and due process rights, fundamental freedoms and political rights, which consist essentially of constraints on government and legislative action. And two, anti-discrimination laws, which prohibit discrimination on various grounds in society generally, and which apply both to public and private actors. Not public and private citizens, public and private actors,
And it's civil rights.
and no human rights, right? Civil. The application of the first category of domestic human rights protections is largely entrusted to the courts. The second category of rights, by contrast, is at least in the first instance enforced by specialized administrative bodies, i.e., the various human rights commissions. So when there's a violation of somebody's human rights in this jurisdiction, they're going to tell you, go to the Human Rights Tribunal before you sue. Because once you go to the Human Rights Tribunal, that's already a checkmated move. As soon as you go to them, they already know that, oh, well, if this person's talking, just like when we were talking with the people about violation of human rights. If we're telling you our human rights are violated, and then you're telling us to go to Canada Human Rights Code, not the international documents, we know that you're part of the dualist society, whose job is to make sure that only statutes, codes, ordinances, and all that stuff get pushed. Nothing else gets pushed, right? And again, you know, when we look at the things that Noble Drew Ali was doing in the time that he was doing it, with no internet and all that stuff, right? And he's talking about 120,000 members in a temple and all this. Then we've actually, you know, digressed. Like we've fallen so far down the ladder that with the internet and all that stuff, we're having more issues getting people. Being able to reach people all around the world.
And everyone have it in their hand.
It's right there. It's not even far.
Sometimes I have to ask them to Google things because
Yeah.
I don't have a phone like
Right. Yeah.
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 And I said, I'm gonna tell you, you find out for yourself. Do
Yeah.
it right now. And you do it, and you're surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But see, but that and that's how that, you know, when we look at we were talking about another thing we were talking about was how when you go on these government websites, how they got advertisements for stuff. Like, why do you have advertisements for things on the government websites if that's not a corporation? Only corporations advertise like that. Like, there's no advertising like that when you're not a corpse. How is it Facebook's getting advertised and Instagram's getting advertised? This is Government of Canada website.
Don't forget
What?
the whole Ford thing now. They slipped up and said,
Oh, when Ford, yeah. Right?
It was the corporation, it's a company.
You're supposed to see it.
Yeah. But then again, look, we're going back to the same thing, that how thick the brainwash is with people. That's the premier. That's you guys' boy who runs the province telling you this is a company.
I know what Dualist said. I'm gonna make them speak.
Make them tell the truth.
Ah, there we go.
Right? Isn't that prophecy manifesting in our face that this man was onto something? And people aren't even considering that. They're going to look at, we don't know what we're talking about, but they're not going to say he doesn't know what he's talking about when he's the one that called it a company. Right? The application of the first category of domestic human rights protections is largely entrusted to the courts. The second category of rights by contracts is, at least in the first instance, enforced by specialized administrative bodies. Both the ordinary courts and the human rights commissions offer adjudication on individual complaints regarding human rights violations, as well as various judicially enforceable remedies where violations are made out. However, in theory, at least the Human Rights Commission's model offers a number of advantages over traditional courts. Typical human rights commissions are comprised of persons with expertise in human rights, have a broader institutional mandate that includes promotion of and public education about human rights, are more accessible to complaints, they have a less formal procedure, and more importantly, if they accept the complaint, the commission will usually investigate and pursue it on behalf of the complainant. Now, for example, dealing with that, with the OIPRD, Ontario Independent Review for Police, right? OP, yeah, so whichever it is, Ontario Police Review Board people, right? They are claiming that, these people are claiming that the Ontario Complaints Commission is more easily accessible, but they have less formal procedures, when their procedures should be more stringent than anybody else. If we can't go to the highwaymen and complain because their process is messed up and whatever like that, then we should be able to go to the human rights people, and their stuff's supposed to be so tight that they're coming back with something. Most of the time, they come back with, like we had the phone call with after we did the complaint, they came back. Of course, they sent their individual with a nationality to deal with us. They sent the Jew. He has his Jewish name and all that stuff. He knew exactly where we're coming from, but that was from a moral perspective, because the police have their job to do, and they have to they have to administer the laws of the country and all this. Well, what about the international law? Well, the international law applies, but it doesn't really apply like that, because police have their own code that they have to. Well, if they're not going to be bound or held responsible for violating their own code on top of the international law, then what are you people here for? What's your purpose really? If we're going to go to them and they're gonna tell you that we what do they say? We investigated and pursued it on behalf of you, but they're not guilty. They're doing everything right. You're wrong.
Well, I think the position that he had, if I remember correctly, the position that he's going on was that they're not against they're not against adhering to some different type of standard. That standard has to be put forth to them. It's like they've been told to smack everyone around, even though smacking everyone around is wrong. Until their boss tells them that it's wrong to smack everyone around, they're going to keep doing it, even though it's wrong to do. that was the position.
Mhm.
And you then needed to then, so basically what it was passing the hat.
Yeah.
You then needed to talk, you then needed to try and get, like, I think they were sort of then trying to put it into the political arena.
Yeah.
You would then have to then go get
Get
legislation.
legislation
to
in order
change
to
this.
get, yeah,
But you're supposed to be law holders.
Yeah.
So you know it's wrong, and they also made allusions, or they alluded to the fact that they're getting a paycheck. So that's kind of why they're doing it. The boss is going to slap everyone around and you see that looks a little more. It's wrong, until our boss tells us not, we're gonna keep doing it. And then those bosses will say it's their officers that are doing it.
yeah,
They're
And
hearing
ultimately-
to say somebody else.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
Just
yeah.
keep going.
right. Pass the buck,
Mhm.
right? Which again lets you know where it's at. If that's how it's gonna run. You go to the independent, whoever, there's the independent, but they're siding with the people who violated you. Then you go to the people who violated you, and then they're not down with upholding anything. You go to the boss of the people who violated you, and they're telling you, well, those guys are just doing their job and all that stuff. So, you know, right? You go to some tribunal's telling you, well, we can't really do anything about it because you didn't go to the people who you're supposed to go to first. You're supposed to come to us last and all this. This is the corruption that's been going on. Why, for example, again, that sister could get murdered in the hospital by these people, and marching and picketing is going on, just like the Negroes. And she's supposed to be indigenous. She's supposed to be Aboriginal and indigenous. They murdered her, and then these people are marching and picketing, just like the Negroes are marching and picketing. I'm not suing somebody. The effect of international human rights law on Canadian law. Canada is a dualist state, meaning that international treaties to which Canada has adhered do not, in and of themselves, alter its domestic law. International treaty law must be incorporated into Canadian domestic law through legislation in order to have direct legal effect, right? Same thing that we're talking about. That if it's not legislated, as in the Monism perspective, that if international law steps up, automatically international law is supposed to be legislated and become the law. There's not supposed to be any question about what is the law after international law is presented. And again, when we go back to Noble Drew Ali's time and him putting the international law on the table, that everybody has a right to a nationality. What's your nationality? And told Moors what their nationality was. And Moors were making progress to the point where shut down the whole U.S. corporation. That they had to do something different to get back into this place of being government, and then not go with anything having to do with international, even looking at it for, what is that, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, at least 60s. And then they start looking at things, and then when they're looking at it, they're, well, we're not signing on to this and all that. We're gonna, keep violating people's rights or whatever. 2000 something, they're saying that they're signing on, and then they sign on, they're still not doing anything. And then the people still aren't in the right concept in mind, because these people should have been sued long time ago by any and everybody who's been violated by them. But they already know that these people, like Nora said, they're gonna go hire their lawyer or be given a lawyer who's gonna tell them, well, we can get you a settlement, 20 million. You only have one eye left, but don't worry, we'll give you 20 million. That'll make your eye better. You don't worry about that. You just take the 20 million. Right? Take the 20 million. Now they can't talk about anything, because obviously there's going to be some type of gag order or whatever like that on that 20 million. They can't talk about it. The lawyer gets how much ever of it, which is going right back to the people who gave them the 20 million. And then the courts, they're going to get their fee, which is coming right out of that finance, and they're getting some. Then the taxes people, who are the same people that just gave them the finance, they're gonna get some of it back. These people are left with 10 million for their son getting murdered or their daughter getting murdered or whatever, and then they're cool with it, right? This is where they have the people at, which again, why the importance of us getting it together so we can do some things to shake this thing up. While signing and ratifying an international covenant gives the illusion of Canada's compliance, in reality, it has no legal effect in our domestic law. Canadians, including lawyers and judges, know little about international human rights law, although this is slowly changing. And remember, this is 2001. Dualism, which is prevalent among Commonwealth states, is in contrast with the Monist approach dominating the United States and among states with a civil law tradition. In a Monist system, duly ratified treaty provisions that are self-executing automatically become part of the state's domestic law. Canada's approach to legislative implementation. Although legislative incorporation is necessary to fully implement treaty rights and obligations, the vast majority of Canada's international human rights treaty obligations have not been the subject of implementing legislation. This means that Canadians cannot, through their courts, compel governments' respect for their international human rights. This appears to be contrary to the spirit, if not the actual terms of international human rights instruments themselves. For instance, Article 2, Section 3 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights requires that to ensure that any person whose rights or freedoms are herein recognized are violated shall be an effective remedy. To ensure that any persons claiming such a remedy shall have his right thereto determined by competent judicial or other competent authority provided for by the legal system of the state, and to develop the possibilities of judicial remedy. To ensure that the competent authorities shall enforce such remedies when granted. How many wars went to court, put their nationality on record, and these people didn't even acknowledge that? Right? Because their approach to international law is they're only recognizing it if it's legislated. If it's not legislated, they're not looking at it as being quote unquote part of the system. They're doing everything in their power to avoid it at all costs. International Journal of Critical Indigenous Studies, Realizing Indigenous Rights in the Context of Extractive Imperialism, Canada's Shifting and Fledgling Progress Towards the Implementation of UN DRIP. Again, we, knowing that we're dealing with this criminal activity or these criminal elements who aren't acknowledging, is more so for us to stand on it, because we know that the power is really with the people, but the power hasn't been with the people because the people don't have a nationality. So the appearance is that the people have no power, when really all the power is with the people. They just don't have national principles. They don't have national standards that they go by, right? In the absence of an intercultural understanding of land and resources and lack of clear definitional and operational guidelines for the implementation of UN DRIP, little progress has been made to advance Indigenous territorial rights in Canada since its signing, outside of Canadian Supreme Court rulings. Upon concluding his visit to Canada in October 2013, James Anaya, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People from 2009 to 2014, indicated that Canada offers no exception to the grave situation of Indigenous people's rights and well-being globally. Indigenous people in Canada, as elsewhere, have been positioned as standing in the way of progress, while being disproportionately and negatively affected by industrial processes. Increasing conflicts has arisen between the rights of Indigenous people and the far reach of global capital in the form of extractivist imperialism. Extractivist imperialism is them going in and taking all the resources and stuff like that. And then again, not informing the indigenous community that this is what they're doing. So as again, going back to the thing of they're supposed to be able to, the indigenous people are supposed to be able to not, something's going on out there. Must be on Eglinton.
You see more and more people talking to themselves and carrying on these
It must be on Eglinton. Human Rights Watch.org, HRW.org. Indigenous rights. There remains considerable challenges to undoing decades of structural and systematic discrimination against Indigenous people in Canada. While Canada officially removed its objector status to the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2016 and vowed to implement UN DRIP in accord with the Canadian Constitution, a private member's bill to ensure the Canadian laws are in harmony with UN DRIP failed to pass in the Senate. Inadequate access to clean, safe drinking water continues to pose a major public health concern in many Indigenous communities and continues to impede efforts to advance Indigenous rights in Canada. One of the world's most water-rich countries, the government has committed to end all drinking water advisories on First Nation reserves by 2021. As of September, 56 First Nation communities across Canada remain subject to such long-term drinking water advisories, etc. In September, Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found that the federal government willfully and recklessly discriminated against Indigenous children living on reserves by failing to provide funding for child and family services. The Trudeau government filed an application seeking a judicial review of the following in October. In January 2019, the UN Human Rights Committee found that Canada, through the long controversial Indian Act, was still discriminating against First Nations women and their descendants. Right? In
church next door.
Saying it's the church people.
they're saying it's the church people? That's the church people.
That's the church people.
Upstairs. No, the church people.
Are you telling me it's upstairs too?
Whether she lives upstairs, this lady I know her as a church lady from over there. I know this lady.
Then there's probably too much church going on. Spirit got them, huh?
There's about 20 people over there, right? 20,
Spirit-
25 people. So
Spirit got them. In
See
September,
possession all the time.
yeah, you know how possession goes.
Even people in my own family.
Yeah, when this,
Joining more science type of America, right?
yeah. Unhex them ASAP. In September, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found, in January 2019, the United Nations Human Rights Committee found that Canada, through the long controversial Indian Act, was still discriminating against First Nations women and their descendants, right? Discriminating against First Nations women and descendants. So they already know where it comes through. They know it comes through women, right? Which is why it's always Indigenous women that's getting the brunt of the issues. And then keep in mind that Indigenous women include the Negro, Black, colored people who don't want to be Aboriginal Indigenous, right? And then you look at the women's situation in that, and that's going on right outside right now.
It's funny,
Going
but
on
it's not
right
funny,
now.
Joe. It's funny, but it's not.
Going on right now. Right. In August, the Trudeau government announced that First Nations women could be treated equally under the Indian Act, enabling them to retain their Indigenous status if they marry non-Indigenous men.
Oh, wow.
Keep them out of their indigenous thing.
And once they get married, that's it.
Once they get married, that's it.
Yeah.
That their birthright gone now.
Yeah, so now they're under two. They're under the Indian Act, and then they're under the Marriage Act, right? Which both of them takes away all their rights, right?
That's true, because I know it's, guy from work says his mom is Native Indian. His dad is white. He's trying to get his indigenous card. They don't give it to him.
They give it to you.
They didn't give it to him.
No, because he's got
His
it.
dad's white. They don't give it to him.
Yeah, because in the democracy, it's through the father.
Yeah.
So, so they don't want to go back in, they're saying they're doing it.
Yeah? Yeah.
You are?
They don't want to go back in the bank.
They don't want to go back in.
Oh, senator.
They've been picking them up for years.
They can't win. They can't win.
Holy Ghost stuff. Speaking, trampling, killing.
They drop them. Sure.
Yeah, y'all need water. Forget Jesus. Go drink some water. That water will wash all them spirits out. Any comments, questions?
I was just doing some reflecting just now, this was going on. These are all women. You know, show you, like we have a lot of work to do.
Oh, yeah.
Mad work.
A lot of work.
Mad work. And again, a lot of it is they got a lot of work to do within themselves too.
Yeah.
You know. 'Cause, like they say, nation can rise no higher than its women.
That's why everything is geared towards women. Keep them on
Suppress
the
the
lower,
women.
yeah, suppress them, and that's it.
Yep.
Women are all caught up in the social media and the whole network, and
Yeah.
they're like, wow.
And again, a lot of those things are directly related to what is it that Noble Drew Ali presented that our people didn't embrace, and why we're seeing all this stuff going on and other stuff going on, right? That ain't no nationality. Don't have a nationality, you don't have national standards. If you don't have national standards, you're not going to live by principles. Not living by principles, no wonder there's demons and stuff like that jumping in and out of people and all that stuff, because they've strayed away from what life is really about. You know what I mean? They've gotten to, or others have gotten to their minds before they got to it. And now they're living with the mind of other nations, thinking that it's theirs, when really that's just, all that's going to do is just keep corrupting it. You know, which is going back to the same thing of, you know, when we're talking about rights and people are talking about civil whatever, and they don't even know civil little mortus, but they're talking about civil this and that. And we start talking about indigenous rights, and they don't want to hear that because they, you know, they came from somewhere else, or they don't know their self. Right? Issues for further study: human rights treaties not yet signed or ratified by Canada. We already discussed the importance of enhancing Parliament's role in considering proposed new treaty commitments by Canada, with particular emphasis on international human rights instruments. As a number of witnesses indicated to us, parliamentary committees such as this one could also quite usefully play a corollary role with the respect to international human rights instruments that Canada has not yet signed and or ratified. Professor William Shabas noted, Parliament need not wait passively or idly for the Department of Foreign Affairs or for other ministries to take on the initiative in determining whether or not to ratify a treaty. Parliament could actually help to push the agenda forward. The committee could analyze the status of outstanding treaties to which Canada has not yet adhered. It could encourage progress by helping to make the treaty more of a priority. The committee could also provide an official and public forum for the airing of concerns. There needs to be a forum where the political costs and benefits of such agreements can publicly be debated. During the course of its study, the committee received a UNESCO publication entitled Human Rights, Major International Instruments, which indicates those instruments that Canada has not yet signed or ratified. In addition, various witnesses brought the committee's attention to different treaties that Canada has not yet signed. In addition to the American Convention on Human Rights, which they don't mention that at all, right? The American Convention of Human Rights, another international human rights instrument that Canada has not signed is the optional protocol to the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Canada is a party to the main convention, but has not signed the optional protocol, because it's optional.
You know, these two ways of talking to these people. I'm Canadian. I said, but you're North America though. Start up. What do you mean? What do you mean start? Canada is just on some years old.
We're sort of North American.
Here a long time. We're talking
Sort of North American.
They still don't want to accept North America. Like, kind of. But Canada, oh yeah, I'm Canadian.
Yeah. They embrace that Canadian. Canada is a party to the main convention but has not yet signed the optional protocol, which would enable the treaty body monitoring the convention to receive and decide upon complaints against Canada. The committee was urged to help make signature and ratification of the optional protocol more a priority. Why don't they make it a priority protocol instead of optional, if it's supposed to be a priority? It was also pointed out that that Canada has not subscribed to another international human rights complaint mechanism, this one concerning the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which Canada ratified in 1970. The American Convention of Human Rights provides an important illustration of an international human rights instrument that is unsigned by Canada, and where the committee could play a useful role in facilitating an open public dialogue on the issues surrounding Canada's possible accession to that convention. This convention is the Organization of American States' principal human rights instrument. Canada has now been a member of the OAS for a decade, but has not signed the convention. Witnesses before this committee urged that we encourage the government to move forward and ratify this important treaty. A major reason to do so, it was argued, is not that it provides unique human rights guarantees, but that ratification would allow Canada to participate more fully in the OAS human rights system. So part of our seeking remedy is what we're talking about, going to the OAS instead of dealing with the UN and certain people. And in dealing with the Organization of American States, you're dealing with the different bodies that adhere or recognize or acknowledge the rights of the indigenous people, but on this side of the hemisphere, right? Because we know that with the crossing of jurisdictions, you have a harder time getting that acknowledged by other bodies who, just like they're saying, already know that Canada violates this and that. Canada doesn't sign on to so and so, and there's no real obligation for any assistance. I remember like a number of years ago, probably like 2010, 2011 or something. We were trying to get we were trying to go to the International Criminal Court, and one of the main things that they stuck to was that we can't even hear anything from outside of the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court that hasn't gone through all the different forms of court first, before we even hear argument.
You have to go check all these places.
You have to go all those places, get turned down first. Then you can go to them. So go into all the channels. You have to go through all the municipal courts. Then be violated there. Then you have to go to the provincial courts, get violated there. Then you have to go to the federal court, get violated there. Then you have to go to the Supreme Court, get violated there. Then, not that they'll make a decision, then we'll hear your thing. We might not even decide on your stuff, but we'll hear your argument because obviously there's a problem if all these people violated, right? When, again, at that point, if we're talking about all those people violated, but all of them are saying, well, we acknowledge international documents from municipal to the Supreme, then from the first violation in the municipal, we should be able to go and seek remedy. Which again goes back to the thing of, oh yeah, how about we just go sue these people? How about we just, every time there's a violation, we do some class action suit against them. Everybody put in their 100, it costs 400 or something like that to file a lawsuit. Everybody put in their 100 and we go sue. In order to seek the remedy that we should receive. Right? Because if the Aboriginal, we're also thinking about this with regard to dealing with some of these different bodies that they have right now. Well, they've been talking about Indian Acts and whatever, right? Indian Acts, the law, and that's gonna help the Indians and whatever. And then we're looking at it, we're saying, well, hold on a second. If the Aboriginal indigenous people who are making the claim that they're Indian aren't really Indian, and then people from Pakistan and all those places are going to come here and then they're going to take Indian position, and then they're going to get in parliament and all that stuff, and you can't even find Aboriginal, indigenous, whoever in parliament and all that, then obviously the Indian stuff that they're really pushing is them, not the Indians who people think are the Indians with native status cards. And then as soon as we start going to them as, well, we're not Negro, black, colored, we're the indigenous people, now we're having a hard time getting people on the phone that we used to get on the phone that it was no issue. We have a hard time hearing back from people. Email not getting returned like it used to. Because the real Aboriginal indigenous people are starting to make a stand or make a claim or say something or make some statements that is putting these people in a messed up position. Because it's not just that we're presenting ourselves, but in us presenting ourselves, it also calls them out. And then we're using all of the, there's UN declarations talking about how much these people violated. That they claim that they're down with this and they're violating. OAS has stuff saying that they're violating. Different human rights groups and all that, recognizing that these people are violating. And they're only violating because the people aren't taking a stand. And the ones who are taking a stand, they're in such limited numbers that they could just wave their hand and get rid of us. It's not, you know what I mean? The idea of rights and law being something in the minds of the people is really only amongst us. Because everybody else is gonna, I just seen they had Breonna Taylor, whatever, and then they have Jesse Jackson up there. No different than they had Al Sharpton or whatever up there, you know what I mean, months ago. And if these are the people who are still in the forefront of the people's liberation and rights and law or whatever, there's some serious issues going on that really aren't going to be fixed if these people are the ones who are on the thing. Everybody knows Jesse Jackson inherited the power of Martin Luther when he got assassinated. Everybody knows he jacked that energy, right? Jacked that energy to the point where taking Dr. King's blood, putting it on him and all that type of stuff. Crazy rituals.
I think he was one.
Right? Crazy rituals to take the energy, right? Like we're saying, Al Sharpton, right? Abernathy, all these individuals, right? You know, Kirkman Bey, Elijah Muhammad, all these people who saw the light in the individuals and didn't do anything to uphold everything that they were learning, did everything to get them out the way so they can have that light. And now they got that light and they're just shining on themselves and leave everybody else in darkness. And then the people in darkness not realizing that it's their own that's putting them in darkness. They're looking at some European or whatever and trying to blame them, saying that they did something. Right? Any comments, questions? Anybody in the chat has anything, just send in the chat.
I think the only one that was really playing their games, like Jesse Jackson and all of them, was Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
He was the only true one that was like looking up.
Yeah, yeah. Because again, remember,
like Martin Luther King, all those guys were all agents.
Yeah.
They're all agents.
Because remember that he was, taking the position of human rights. Because he gave up on all that stuff of the black and all that. He was done with all that. Realized that's going nowhere. The only way that we're going to be recognized is if we deal with the international community with regard to human rights. Because the civil rights stuff is dead. And that was 60s, he was telling them the civil rights stuff is dead. Right? Immediate recommendations. Canada's representation at the United Nations Human Rights Commission. The United Nations Human Rights Commission in Geneva is the foremost body on human rights in the United Nations system. As Philippe Leblanc observed to the committee, the UN Commission on Human Rights is the highest forum internationally for dealing with human rights violations by states. The Commission is comprised of 53 member states, which are elected on a regional basis. In recent years, though Canada's official representative has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs, right, so that's somebody else to put on your CC list, that if you're dealing with any human rights issues, the Minister of Foreign Affairs is the seat that Canada holds in the United Nations. Right? And then when you check everybody else, their representative is not a minister. So when you look at the society at large, they're going to be talking about minister and relate that to the people next door, right? Why is it that the United Nations is accepting a minister as the seat of a governmental position? Right? It puts even them in question, because even the fact of Canada being in the Organization of American States, there was articles of Fidel Castro challenging them on how are they in this? We don't even know what they are. We don't even know if they're a country, because they say that they're a colony. And since when are colonies allowed to be part of the Organization of American States? Colonies shouldn't be part of the Organization of American States. But then, crazy, see how fast they got rid of him. And then they got rid of Hugo Chavez because he was talking BS about Canada. And once you got the people out of the way who know what's up, then they put their little puppets in there who are going to let the game continue. The committee recommends that given the particular significance of Canada's role at the upcoming 2002 session of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, the government of Canada should, so this is since 2002, they're talking about this. The government of Canada should appoint someone as ambassador ranking as its representative at the commission, ensure that the Canadian delegation included active and informed parliamentarians of all parties, including independents, and from both houses who have experience and interest in the human rights field. If they don't have interest in the human rights field, they shouldn't even be sitting on the seat in the UN. And then you do your research on the Minister of Foreign Affairs and see his background and see, obviously he's not some human rights guy, right? The committee recommends that within the existing reporting process as presently structured, the Government of Canada, in cooperation with the provincial governments and territories, take the necessary steps to ensure that all Canada's outstanding reports to the various international rights treaty bodies are submitted. The committee recommends that the Government of Canada assign to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, along with sufficient resources, the task of conducting a human rights impact analysis of the new security and counterterrorism measures to verify whether proportionality is being achieved between national security and terrorism measures. The committee recommends that the Government of Canada draft and table in Parliament amendments to the Canadian Human Rights Act that would add social condition as a prohibited ground of discrimination. The committee recommends that the Government of Canada respond to the Canadian Human Rights Act review panel during the current session of Parliament. In the context of this response, the government should address the following issues: adding express references to key international human rights instruments to the Canadian Human Rights Act, and the need to ensure a greater dedication of resources to the Human Rights Commission's mandates with respect to human rights, promotion, and education, as well as legislation and policy review. The committee recommends that the Government of Canada ensure that the international human rights instruments to which Canada is a party, as well as information on any complaint mechanism, be consolidated and made easily accessible to Canadians via internet, and that Canadians be made aware of how to access this information. The committee recommends that the Government of Canada take the necessary steps to reinstate the practice of regular federal, provincial, and territorial meetings on human rights at the ministerial level. These meetings should be held on at least a triennial basis. Other documents reviewed from witnesses and other individuals. Report on the UN Human Rights Treaty System. Background document on the origins and history of continuing Committee of Officials on Human Rights. Manitoba Human Rights Commission. Ontario Human Rights Commission. Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission. Australia Senate Legal and Constitutional References. So again, they're going to go all over the world, go all over the so-called corporation, find all these different bodies, people, or whatever like that, that are claiming some human rights thing, but then they're not even dealing with anything relative to that. Which again goes back to why it is that we're here, how important our position is, knowing that we're Moors, knowing that we should be studying the law and know the law, so that people can get up to speed with where we're at. But if they don't get to where we're at, there ain't nothing happening. The stuff is already done. Let's get to our Quran lesson for today. Chapter 36, Holy Instructions from the Prophet, Know Thyself. 83. Page 83 in the small Quran. Holy Instructions from the Prophet, Know Thyself. Weak and ignorant as thou art, O man, humble as thou ought to be, O child of the dust, wouldst thou raise thy thoughts to infinite wisdom? Wilt thou see omnipotence displayed before thee, Contemplate thy frame. Fearful and wonderful art thou made. Praise therefore thy Creator with awe, and rejoice before him with reverence. Wherefore, of all the creatures, thou art only erect, but thou shouldn't behold his works. Wherefore art thou to behold, but that thou mayest admire them? Wherefore to admire, but that thou mayest adore there and thy Creator? Wherefore is consciousness reposed on thee alone? And whence is it derived to thee? Is it not in flesh to think? Is it not in bones to reason? The lion knoweth not that worms shall eat him. The ox perceiveth not that he is fed to slaughter. Something is added to thee, unlike to what thou seest. Something informs the clay. Higher than all is the object of thy senses. Behold, what is it? The body remaineth perfect after it is fled. Therefore, it is no part of it. It is immaterial. Therefore, it is eternal. It is free to act. Therefore, it is accountable for its actions. Knoweth the ass the use of food, because his teeth mow down the herbage? Or standeth the crocodile erect, although its backbone is as straight as thine? Allah formed thee as he formed these. After them all wert thou created. Superiority and command were given thee over all. And of his own breath did he communicate to thee the principle of knowledge. Know thyself and the pride of his creation, the line uniting divinity and matter. Behold, a part of Allah himself within thee. Remember thine own dignity, nor dare descend to evil or to meanness. Who planted terror in the tail of the serpent? Who clothed the neck of the horse with thunder? Even he who hath instructed thee to crush the one under thy feet, and to tame the other to thy purpose. So part of this was from I was looking at this documentary yesterday on the food industry, and how all the different animals that they had in the slaughterhouse or whatever were it was almost like they knew that they were about to get slaughtered. They might not have known while they were running around with the other one, but when they got into their little line to go to the machine, that when they look on the other side of the machine, other one that went through there is already upside down or whatever like that, they had the look of knowing something's up. Right? At that point, did they know themselves? What is in the consciousness? Just like you're saying, you think we're the only one that have consciousness? For all the lack of consideration for those things, the lack of consideration for trees, that people just cut them down just because they can. The lack of consideration for water, which is in ancient times, that's a god or whatever, that people just gonna dump in it just because they can. Right? Knowing thyself, being in our Quran, in the first pages of it, is an important aspect of who we are, who we're gonna be, and where we're gonna go. And we're starting to realize more and more that knowing thyself really has to deal with going back into your own personal life and sorting out some stuff. Because in knowing ourselves and looking at, why are we, certain ways that we are. The good things, we can say, oh, well, my dad was or whatever, and my mom was there, and my granddad was there, my grandmother was there. But also the messed up stuff that we are is because of them too. And we have to look at those things in order to correct them so we can move forward properly. So, like one of the aspects of the self, like Dualist said, is knowing the higher self and knowing the lower self. Knowing the things that make us great and knowing the things that make us fall victim to certain things, whether it's influence, whether it's habits, whatever it is. There are certain things that we need to consider, just like we were talking about earlier with what was going on outside. Are they really acting on something happened, or are they acting on something in their past they never dealt with? Right? Somebody yelling at the top of their lungs could be because they were yelled at as a child, and they never dealt with that. That's all they know. The child that's abused is only going to know how to abuse. You know what I mean? The woman who's abused is being a bad influence on their child, because the offspring is going to look at you and see what you're doing. The offspring is looking at you get your ass beat, and you're not considering that. You're out of love or out of some BS, you're going to stay in it. Oh, I can't leave because of whatever. But child sitting there watching, trust me, you're putting some trauma on them that is going to not have them know their self when they get older. Have them perpetuating the same cycles that the individual is going through. So when we talk about know thyself, it's not just have a library and read books. Right? Know thyself is really going into who we are, what made us up, and what are our faults, because we all know that ain't nobody perfect out here. So the faults that we do have, what are the things that created these faults in us? Are we considering fixing these things within ourselves before we start doing anything else? It ain't no different than people say nationality, and then they got a nationality card and they think that's it. As if, like we say, like as if the niggers can't jump out of you at some time because you think the card is what's doing it. But that lower self could jump out of you at any time. That lower self jump out of you with the wrong highwayman around, you get your ass beat. And then you're gonna look at them like, oh, they violated or whatever. Well, what did you do? Were you an intelligent tone? Were you in your habit? Were you in your fez turban? You know what I mean? Were you doing something reckless? What was really going on? What allowed this quote unquote violation to happen? And again, there has to be a point of recognizing the fault and at least working toward correcting the fault. Even if it's not gonna be correct that right away. There has to be some type of process of seeing, recognizing, acknowledging that, oh damn, I got some issues because of whatever. And dealing with those things. I know with myself, it's procrastination, right? Waiting to do stuff. Have to, stub my foot on that thing before I move it. Even knowing, even getting the intuitive thing that, oh yeah, about to fall down the stairs because I didn't move this thing, and then fall down the stairs. Right? because there's some type of block there. Um, um, seeing the seeing the laundry and not doing it the day I seen it, for whatever reason. 2 days later, 3 days later, dealing with it. When it should have been done as soon as you seen it, as soon as you recognize it, should have just did it right then. Right? It's all part of the motions, right? I mean, those are little stuff. There's major stuff that people are dealing with that they don't have a grasp on, right? All of us. You know what I mean? But saying all that to say that know thyself is an integral part of this, but don't just look at know thyself as some book thing. Oh yeah, now because we read our Quran and we read our 101s, everything's good. It might not necessarily be yet. There's stuff that we continually got to work on. If anybody has any thoughts on the chapter, you could put those up. Somebody in the chat asked the question, how will nationalizing affect your place in society? You just go around and ask some of the Moors here. How would nationalizing affect your place in society?
Nationalizing change social conditions in the sense of do not look at everyone as black color, which are dead statuses, which have no standing in law, so your vibration will raise up because you know yourself. You're knowing yourself now, as opposed to not knowing that you have true nationality. Nationalizing. Is there a question again? What's nationalizing?
How will nationalization affect your place in society?
The rights that you were once given from birth, that was converted to privileges, can be restored because they were never inalienable or unalienable, which cannot be bought, checked, or sold. So your rights are retained, right? That's what I know.
Islam.
And get back to social standing.
Yeah.
Color or equal that color or have. So, yeah, it ties it to your pedigree, your bloodline, your descendants, landmass, character.
All the things that we've been lacking. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Nationalizing, is it? How's it affecting society?
Affect your place in society.
When it makes you back part of the human family, right?
Mm-hmm. We'll also put out there chapter 30. Holy instruction from the prophet, the social duties. When thou considerest thy wants, when thou beholdest thy imperfections, acknowledge his goodness, O Son of Humanity, who honored thee with humanity, endowed thee with speech, and placed thee in society to receive and confer reciprocal helps and mutual obligations, protection from injuries, thy enjoyments of the comforts and the pleasures of life. All these thou owest to the assistance of others, and couldn't not enjoy but in the bands of society. It is thy duty, therefore, to be a friend to mankind, as it is thy interest that man should be friendly to thee. As the rose breatheth sweetness from its own nature, so the heart of a benevolent man produceth good works. He enjoyeth the ease and tranquillity of his own breast, and rejoiceth in the happiness and prosperity of thy neighbor. He openeth not his ear unto slander. The faults and the failings of men give a pain to his heart. His desire is to do good, and he researcheth out the occasions thereof in removing the oppression of another. He relieveth himself. His desire is to do good, and he researcheth out the occasions thereof. In removing the oppression of another, he relieveth himself. From the largeness of his mind, he comprehendeth in his wishes the happiness of all men, and from the generosity of his heart, he endeavoreth to promote it. So one of the aspects with regard to affecting the place in society with nationalization is not nationalizing to try to get something out of it. You're not nationalizing to beat some case, or you're not nationalizing because you heard that no duality trust and you want to access some account or whatever, right? Like the majority of Morris says, you're declaring, proclaiming your nationality so that you can put yourself in a different status so that life can actually start happening. Life can actually start being an experience that you can get something beneficial from. Once you nationalize, you change your mindset. Once you change your mindset, you change your condition. Without nationality or without a nationality, people suffer. Look at the conditions of our people who don't have a nationality. It's a living example of what we're going through as a people being stateless. And then go look up the UN Convention on Statelessness to see the importance of nationality, or like you're asking what the benefit of nationalizing is as far as your place in society. Because there is a benefit. It might seem it might not be apparent to the individual just coming into this, right? Because we have so many things that we're dealing with, that everything we look at is supposed to get us out of our issues or get us out of our problems. But this is not what that is, right? Becoming a member of Canaanland Temple, we have honorary membership for Moors who are outside of Canaanland due to the lack of temples everywhere. Majority of people who are sincere about this, they actually do try to find more science temple or whatever to go to. The people who are honorary members of Canaanland Temple have gone to different temples to, be members, join, find out about this, and the energy that they get there is not what they get from Canaanland Moors or RV Bay or any other Moors out there who are about the upliftment of our people. So to be a member here, you would just send an email to canaanlandguide@gmail.com. We'll send you the membership form and go from there. Are there any questions? Oh, somebody said okay, we'll ask this one to the Mars. What do you say to people who say that you have or we have no army? How are we a nation and we have no army?
Put it like this. Every melanated being or American, you refer to American now, one of the various competent people found in the continent by the European, right? That's an old time Webster's, right? Right? So, like 1800s. So we look at that, every melanated being is a Moor, right? And so we have Moors in the military, right? Like when Dualist times, he knew Moors in the military, right?
Yep.
That were, if you on deck, if you had one of the tanks, you got the tanks, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it says state of mind how you're looking at it.
Yep.
You gotta look at it as more in the military. Right? And we have instructions too, right? Our military is, each individual's military should be their mind, that should be their weapon. That's why, the prophet said also to you, not to even carry a pocket knife. Right? If you're vibrating so high, your mind should be vibrating so high that you're not even, what you're for yesterday.
Yep.
That's what I think, so, like, you don't really need an army. You just need to be in tune with yourself and on a higher frequency.
Yeah.
So there's no need to fighting or guns or anything like that.
It goes back to when I was speaking about knowledge, the way democracy, pen, the sword, mouth is better.
Yes.
So you get a sword or a gun, pen to write, mouth just to speak it.
Mhm.
Armies, when we all wake up collectively.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Hope you like that one.
They better. You ain't going up with no pea shooters against the drone and all that stuff. So you playing around with army when these people have sound weapons and all that. You're not winning no war with these people like that. You know.
To put them in a different arena.
Yeah.
Like they hate all their weapons and their guns and ammunition.
Yeah.
Just put them in a verbal arena, intellectual arena.
And we always go back. We always go back to the Moors who, when they were talking with their elders that were in Vietnam, and these people were saying that these people's army didn't stand a chance against guerrilla warfare.
Mm-hmm.
They stand a chance. No matter what they had, they were done for once you got in them bushes. You get in them bushes, army's useless.
They knew that too. They came over with Agent Orange to destroy our reputation and expose them.
Yeah.
So even that too, when you reflect on that, your whole warfare, like that, you felt, right? So you felt all those things came about, no? You know how it went? Guerrilla warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Vibrating so high, not army, you don't need to be thinking warfare.
Yeah.
So we felt.
Other questions, comments out there? Throw them out.
And the Europeans waiting for us to wake up too, right? That's the first step.
Yeah.
They're not gonna tell us, they're waiting for us. Right? All movies, subliminals, subliminal, right? Focus on what is going Fears and all the things.
No, I said before, remember you said.
Yeah, but they've been telling us.
Yeah.
They've been telling us.
Yeah.
They've been report for it. They've been telling us.
President.
Is there a class action lawsuit going on so we can move forward on nationalizing? But if there is a class action lawsuit going on, that has nothing to do with nationalizing, because you would have to be a national in order to file the class action lawsuit. You can't file a class action lawsuit as NBC or African or Indian or anything like that. You better be a national. So it's really about is there nationalizing so we can move forward in a class action lawsuit?
Is there a question someone asked?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Or they may be thinking you gotta, file a lawsuit to get.
In order to get your
birthright,
Yeah.
and get your stuff.
because the concept is out there that in order to nationalize you have to go to court. So it could be on that perspective as well, where again, if there's Moors teaching you about you need to go to court to be a Moor,
Yeah, and it's not.
Or charging you money.
Earlier question was asking about the army, you didn't even deal with that.
right.
There's someone playing with their brain to ask the question like.
Yeah. Or put some concept out to make them ask that question. Yeah. Somebody's playing game. Right. Can you describe what would happen if we had enough active and competent Moors? What would be first, second on the to-do list? When do new Moors such as myself begin the process of nationalizing? If enough of our people were competent and active, there would probably be no need for so-called government, so-called state governor, governor general, provincial, whoever, municipal, whatever, because we can handle our own affairs. And we're the ones who fund the beast system more than anybody else, our people. So with our people being competent of their nationality and their birthrights, it would end a lot of the suffering that's going on from the perspective of whether it's family suffering, individual suffering, male, female issues or whatever. Majority of that stuff will be solved because once you become competent, you can't go back after. Once you know what it is, and then you leave knowing what it is to play like you don't know, then you're a traitor and you'll probably end up on a wall somewhere, stoned to death or shot up or whatever like that, because you become useless to the nation. Because it's all about active and competent Moors being that. And to not be that, when you know that's where we're supposed to be, you're obviously working with the other side trying to keep us in the denationalized state.
Because they already been there in that state, so they know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna go back and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're gonna go for the steak. Yeah. You want the steak and not the porridge? That's not where you want to be at. Right. What do new Moors such as myself begin the process? When do new Moors such as myself begin the process of nationalizing? What about some new Moors? What clicked to make you say, I'm gonna declare my nationality, forget that Negro black color stuff?
For me personally, knowing that I've been around the church thing with my mother, I always read about the birthright.
Yeah.
Birthright, that's one. Main thing, birthright. Knowing that I have birth certificate. When I talk about it with my mother, she said, your father never had one. That's why I never get the call to come to Canada, because he never couldn't get a passport. He never have a birth certificate. He only have the name. Then when I have to come here, I have to get it, because he never had it. It's 23, 24, I get it. Just to come here. So now, bringing back the birth side to my mother, she get it. She know you're right with what you're talking. Certificate of all things.
Yeah.
So simple that just that alone trigger me.
Yeah.
Against that.
Yeah.
Years ago, across the street.
Mm.
So we were looking over there and walked in. Yeah, okay. I'm good.
Yeah.
Because I was already on like RBB website. You know, I was lucky, you know, I can say that.
Yeah.
I was already on the RBB website, and when I walked in, I saw Omar, you know, all right.
Yeah.
For me, it was kind of odd because at first I was into like, like whole Native Indian, like finding out what from here and all that. And then it was my African friend, I think he's from Nigeria specifically. He caught me on the bus, and I hadn't seen him in a long time, but you see I'm putting all this indigenous stuff on Instagram, so we could. So he got me, he's like, oh, you talking about that Moorish stuff? Like, I didn't know what Moor was at the time.
It's that.
So I'm just like, nah, like, I didn't say I'm not a Moor, but I'm like, I don't know what that is, but alright. So I had to go look back at it, and then the first person who I seen was Taj.
Mm.
And then after Taj, I see it. And then after Sierra, I seen Moreno. And then after Moreno, then he came.
Peace to Brother Moreno.
Oh,
Yeah.
kill Eglinton. So I'm like, oh. But at the time, I didn't just jump into it. I don't just jump into anything. You know, I just do research,
Yeah.
Not know what.
Yeah, I think that's the main part. You know what I mean? Doing your due diligence. Just not jumping into it. Doing your research, background research, fact checking everything, just to see how real it is. Because yeah, you can be told, but when you research and find out for yourself about what it is, it makes it something more personal to you. You know what I mean? It makes it way more personal to you.
Yeah, me, I was going through my, my court stuff. And brother Tyree, shout out to brother Tyree. He's the one that showed me, like, Randy, So I was going through that lower state stuff. I said, Randy, this is another side of the court, what are you talking about? From that point, long story short, it's like, it just came, we just, we stay up all night, and just from there, notes, like, notes days, videos, coming to getting taken on the videos, we'd be up 3, 4 in the morning, like, pausing videos, timing, all these different videos, just going through the motion. Said, no, what do you mean? Like, they never told us none of this in school.
Yeah.
And the funny thing that caught Tyreek and I would be that, we went to St. Thomas More.
Yeah.
We went to St.
Never
Thomas
said
More.
anything.
You know what I mean? I never said nothing. St. Thomas More.
High school, that's what it was called?
Yeah, that's in high school, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a building that the police and the fire department use, like foundation building,
Yeah.
and it says Del Moro.
Yeah.
Everyone's passing this stuff
Passing it for years. Blind. As soon as you get this more science, everything's popping out the woodwork, son. Yeah.
There's even like a China temple. It was like right next to my girl's house. I pass by it all the time. I didn't realize it until I got to the horse.
Yeah.
I seen the whole symbol. I'm like, oh, What's up there? Now is he shot? Yes. I will try to. Yes. Yes.
Eyes wide open. Eyes wide open. Yeah.
As we start to believe.
Right. How would the transition of power look like as far as us handling our own affairs? Well, if we put that idea out there again, that okay, everybody proclaims their nationality or whatever, right? Then there would be no use for the colonial powers. They would leave, go back to where they came from, and then we would get our stuff back. All those governmental buildings, different people who are qualified would take that over. The people who deal with the irrigation, whatever like that, they'll take over. The people who are skilled in the technological, because we already are running a lot of the stuff. When you look at the science and technology and stuff like that, it's Asiatic women running all those stuff there. You know what I mean? All these different schools, Harvard, Yale, whatever like that. Our own will take it over. All the entertainment, sports, or whatever like that. All those people, the Asiatics, they'll take over stuff, and it'll be supremely smooth transition. But everybody has to be competent.
Generally, when you check out most companies and most workplaces, one of the big guys in there is one of us.
Yeah.
Always one of us.
Yeah.
It's like the puzzle came fixed without one of us in there. Yeah. For real.
Yeah.
Can't fix it.
That's a fact. Yeah.
And he's overqualified usually and underpaid.
Yeah.
That goes synonymous.
Overqualified and underpaid is a regular thing. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Like even I had a friend from Philips Healthcare, right? And he used to go to hospitals and set up the machinery and come up with new machines and tell me, it's unbelievable there, right? There's so many black doctors who are far brilliant than the white doctors.
Yeah. But they're not even getting their acknowledgement.
They're not in the status and they get less paid.
Yeah. That's how it goes. That's how.
This is coming from a quote unquote white person that's telling you this.
Yeah. And that's how we lost it all. You know what I mean? Same thing. Once you have no status, you don't count in the real world. Unfortunately, but that's just where it is.
So for me now, I think in time the transition will be even better.
Yeah.
Because we have so much knowledge. You know what I mean? That we haven't even begun to put to use. Put into practice. Yeah. So it'll be better.
Yeah.
We have all the information now.
Yeah.
These people are really asleep.
Yeah. Or if I woke you all up once, you're gonna tear everything up. So I'm not gonna wake you all up like that. Because you'll be so whatever about, you know what I mean? This is what's going on. Transition, we got the thing back and people go nuts.
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 He said too, get behind me when the fire comes out.
Yep,
Your
water.
So see, that's the thing too. A lot of our people are just stirring, like they're just stirring around it, saying, "Well, I know we're Moors, but I don't know how the transition will work. Should I proclaim my nationality now? Or should I wait?
Wait to see what happens." Yeah.
It's fear, man. It's
behind me.
just fear.
Wait till the last moment and then ask.
Yeah. Omar, you got something?
No, I was gonna say that I think that your view of this transition being seamless like that, I think is something I see a different view of this, because I think that it's going to be rough in certain ways. I think what has to happen, like in any work, there's got to be a training process so that people that are there, the prophet said he's leading the Europeans here to teach us government. So we would have to be going back to school. We all have to be doing twice as much work as we're doing now, 5 times as much work to get caught up to speed with this. You have to hit the books hard, and it's gonna be rough. So I see it being much different. This isn't about us just waking up one day. We haven't been operating right now properly ourselves. So how are we then gonna, when they give us the keys to the jet, fly?
No, but we have people who know how to fly jets, and we have people who are. It's not. We're not talking about the people who aren't there. We're saying that there's people who are
I'm saying that across
who are
the
in
board,
those positions.
You're talking about in certain positions. You're talking about now everyone's stepping down and us stepping in. It's not gonna be like that.
Right? I agree with you too, and that's why the prophet, I conclude by saying this, like, the prophet said, it's gonna be done in a way that can accomplish that works.
That would be the journey to get us even to that point. Right? I'm
So
saying,
we're, even us saying going and you disagreeing with him, it's gonna be done in a conflict that accomplish works.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
I'm saying there's no love there.
And that's how it is. The prophet was a mastermind. He lived. That's why he said those things. Because he knew he was sitting there one day figuring out how and talking about it. Right?
Well, you bring up a good point, and that gentleman and whoever it is asks a good point. One of the things that I continue to implore us to do is to have a plan. What happens if tomorrow what happens tomorrow if they all go home? We're in trouble. Because we can't even feed ourselves now. So what I'm saying is that that's part of it. Action plans have to be done or made, and we have to start visualizing how this happens. As I said, if someone will tell you to take over a machine, and you've never worked that machine before, and let's say there weren't any Asiatics there, how are we going to learn? This stuff has to start to be done. It has to start now. You don't just, they don't just give you the keys to the vehicle. So that's my view on this, that it's not going to be that seamless. And I think it would be a mistake for us to think like that. They're not giving it up like that anyways, right? So,
Yeah, that's why the question was answered like that, because the individual, I'm pretty sure the individual asking that question probably hasn't even proclaimed yet, or if they have proclaimed, they've been on this a year or something, and they're looking at some, you know what I mean, leprechaun stuff at the end of the rainbow or whatever.
I agree with you.
You know what I mean? You know. And the last one we got here is do you think the Moors have a case to sue the education board for not telling the whole truth about American history?
They told you how they got it, what they did. Now they're talking about you.
Yeah. And that's their school board. Why are you going to them? We should have had our own school board. You should be suing your nigger leaders who didn't set up a school board for you to teach you your stuff. All they got to give you is lectures and all that stuff, and they even set up anything. But then Drew Ali, who told you, from Sunday school comes the guiders of your nation, you deny him and go to these other people's school, which, we set ourselves up for certain things. So before we're looking at them to say, oh, those guys, they should have there. What did we do, or what didn't we do to not have certain things? It's no different than, before we sue the school board, how about we sue the hip hop industry for putting all this BS music out there, brainwashing people, and all this perversion that they're calling music. How about we sue them? The school board is going to be doing what they do, right? And especially if you choose knowing that they're not teaching the truth about American history, and then you still sending people there to go learn something when you already know that they're not going to teach you about it.
But the way they set it up is like, you want to be a lawyer, but for you to get to a lawyer, you have to do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, no matter what road you take, you're going to embrace what they want you to embrace, to brainwash you.
Yeah.
Right? So,
And when we look at that concept too of, you know, them not teaching the whole truth about American history, Joel even told you get a good European education, and I could use it because that all that stuff about, you know, them, um, their education board and whatever like that is really our education board because we taught them. They didn't just make that stuff up that they're telling you lies about or whatever. Like we taught them, and we dropped the ball because we weren't teaching ourselves, and now we're complaining. Just like we had, you know, go down. What was it, brother Nor? Grandma said, go clog your nose and just push the stuff in your mouth, and you're better in 2 hours. You know, go outside, go boil some bush out there or whatever like that. But you didn't want that. So now you got to deal with cut you open and pills and all that stuff. It's not, you know, we set ourselves up. You know, so we have to look at ourselves. Going back to the thing with the know thyself, you got to look at ourselves. We played
I
ourselves.
mentioned that it's, a week ago, I was in a kind of store, and a lady came in, they tried to get something for a baby, cough or whatever. And the doctor, the pharmacist find two stuff on the shelf. Trying to explain to her. One, if he had a cough, this one is okay. But if he had a cough and fever, this one is not okay because this one gonna send up the blood pressure while helping that part.
Mm.
So like, no, she's lost the people who are.
Sounds confusing.
Yeah. So I'm telling her, you know what you do, lady, go home and get some coconut oil, do this, do that with some stuff here, and try together, give the baby a spoon of that oil. She was that.
Yeah.
She don't know that. She don't know about that. It's one of her people. I'm seeing her there in the pharmacy. The guy's telling them the truth. Both, I want to tell you, they're not even good enough, but I'm here to give it to you.
Yeah.
You tell her what can happen. If you take this one, it's only for it's gonna set up with blood pressure unnecessarily. But if you have the other symptom, then you can use this one. So in other words, in any way, it's gonna set up a blood pressure. But if you don't have that problem, you don't need to use it. And so in one way, it's gonna set up the blood pressure, but it's gonna help the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a way.
Problem with a problem.
Yeah.
Solution with a problem, I mean. Yes. Yeah. Get back to nature. Get back to nature. That's the best bet. And this is why I asked about the class action. Moors are getting land in other parts of America, but it's on a hush. So why haven't we Moors came together and sued them as well? So-called Native Americans got, goes back to that thing. If we're getting into this information from the perspective of get something back other than get your mind back, you're not coming into this with the right perspective. The whole purpose of getting this information is getting ourselves out of mental slavery that we have right now. Once we get ourselves out of mental slavery, then everything else is going to fall into place. The reason why stuff's not falling into place is because we got mental slavery still. And we don't want to acknowledge that, you know, if we said we're Negroes for 20 years, the 21st year we're a Moor, we have 19 more years to go to get your mind right so you could be a Moor fully. And then if you don't want to put in that time, then, you know, you're going to get this peg leg perspective of your nationality. You know?
You just have land and all that stuff, but you might as well still be the same.
Right.
You might as well you stay where you were.
Yeah. Because we say
You're doing all the other stuff you're doing in the first place.
Yeah.
So let's keep it moving.
Yeah. Like we have the ability to sue them to get back land. All right. So we sue them and we get the land back. And, you know, just like Omar is saying, if we don't got any tractors or nobody doesn't know how to till land,
What's the point?
the land's just gonna sit there.
And let's be honest, probably what he's talking about is there's some sort of incorporation process more than likely going on. Sort of like, an acquiescence to, like you say, if you're having to go to them to get it back.
Yeah, there's something's going on there, yeah.
Instead of you just go take a piece, fence it off and say, this is it.
Yeah, yeah.
Or better yet, go to like the deeds and look up the property.
Yeah.
No access.
Yeah.
All wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, claim.
Islam, Morris.
When you get a good mindset, they will know that land, it can't be bought, it can't be sold, so why am I gonna worry about a piece of land for? It's mine, it's there,
Yeah.
you know? Like,
Yeah.
you don't even have to worry about it, you need to think higher than.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, going back to what Rennie said, it's a conflict that can't be told in words. We can talk about it all day, but if we're gonna get the stuff back like that, you'll just wake up one day with the stuff like, damn, how'd this happen? Well, can't be told in words. Great. Great. Peace and love to all Moors in the chat. Let's get this close out. Honors to all the Moors worldwide. Honors to all the mothers. 5 on the left, 2 on the right. Allah, the Father of the universe.
Allah, the Father of the universe.
Father of love.
Father of love.
Truth. Peace.
Peace.
Freedom. And justice. Allah is my protector. My guide. And my salvation. By night. And by day. To our holy prophet. Lord Ali. Asher. Islam. Islam, Morris.